Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Naomi Schiller. I'm so delighted to see you all here today. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat, say what part of the world you're zooming in from, and maybe your connection to CUNY. So before we begin, sorry, Gaston, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, I gotta say a couple of words. To celebrate you, and then I turn it back to you as people continue to come in. So my name is Gaston Alonso. I am the director of the Ethel R. Wolf Institute for the Humanities at Brooklyn College, and I am so honored. I am so excited. I've been excited all day to welcome you to today's event. This is the third in a 5-part series to celebrate recent books by Brooklyn College faculty. And today we celebrate Disruptive Engagement, an organizer's guide to building community power for justice in land use and housing in New York City. Disruptive Engagement, I love that title, right? This is a handbook for organizers and city residents that was collectively produced by Brooklyn College anthropology professor and my colleague Naomi Schiller and other organizers who are with us today. Please join me in giving them a round of applause for Professor Schiller, Julia Bryant, Jenny Dobnow, Memo Salazar, and Vanessa Till. Now, if you're interested in reading the book and learning from this awesome group of organizers, and I can tell you that after this conversation, you will be, you can get the book at the link that we're sharing in the chat. Now, let me also take this opportunity to invite you to join us for other upcoming book events, and we'll also be placing that link in the chat with the information. I also want to invite you to join us the first week of April, 2 weeks away, for what we call HES Week, a series of public events organized to honor the work of this year's HES Scholar in Residence at Brooklyn College, historian, union president, and organizer Paul Ortiz. 4 days, 8 events, 25 speakers, including Professor Schiller. Important discussions about academic freedom, about the crisis of democracy, and the role of oral history and of movement solidarity in defending our freedoms and our democratic practices. We will be placing the link in the chat for that week's program. Please join us. And lastly, please follow the Wolf Institute on social media so you can learn about these and the rest of our upcoming programming. And we'll place those links on the chat. Now, let me quickly thank the sponsors of this event. First and foremost, I have to thank the Center for Humanities at the CUNY Graduate Center and Sam Starkweather personally for all of the work they did to get all of you here today, as well as the Departments of Africana Studies, Political Science, Puerto Rican and Latinx Studies, and Sociology, and the Program in Sustainability Studies and the Center for the Study of Brooklyn at Brooklyn College. Thanks to each of you for your support in bringing us all together this evening. Now, I'm going to leave it up to today's speakers to talk about the book. No spoilers from me. But I do want to say that both as a student of community organizing and as someone committed to justice, this is one of the most empowering books I've engaged in a long time. It not only reminds us, as the song that opened this program did, that the people have the power, it also shows us how to move collectively, how to organize, how to create solidarity, how to dream about just neighborhoods and about just cities, and then how to build those just neighborhoods, those just cities. And I can think of no more urgent agenda in this city and at this time. So thank you so much for being with us. And Professor Schiller, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Gaston. I really appreciate the introduction, the kind, warm welcome, and all your work to host and promote this event. Before we begin, I just wanted to quickly read a land acknowledgement, which is a practice that I learned at a previous HES event, actually, with Winona LaDuke. So we'd like to begin by acknowledging that Brooklyn College, in a borough known as Brooklyn, in a neighborhood officially designated as Little Haiti, sits on traditional and unceded territory stolen from the Canarsie and the Nyack, subgroups of Lenape people. That ongoing theft along with the stolen lives and labor of enslaved Africans, enables our presence. We pay our respect to Indigenous African and immigrant elders past, present, and future who have stewarded this land, and particularly to the hundreds of Indigenous nations who continue to resist and live across their lands. This acknowledgement, while neither sufficient nor complete, is part of a process of learning and action in line with CUNY's mission to provide a transformative education to the whole people of New York City. So I think for myself, really quickly, I think that the work necessary to redress the ongoing theft of Indigenous land and violence against colonized people around the world, from the US to Gaza, is almost unimaginable. And yet I think we must imagine and engage in this work. So we're so delighted to have you all join us tonight to think together about what role all of us can play in shaping the future of our neighborhoods and New York City more broadly. I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa, my co-editor.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with you all. Yeah, my name is Vanessa Till. I'm an artist and got involved in community organizing in the Lower East Side Chinatown, which is how I met Naomi a few years back. At the moment, I'm in California on the Lenape or on the Ohlone lands, and we actually just had an amazing victory of a site here was a sacred site was just returned to a local land trust led by Indigenous women. So just want to throw that in there, that this is all there's a lot of hope to be found in this work. So we're delighted to be joined by speakers tonight who are contributors to the book and collaborators, Julia Bryant, Jenny Dubnow, and Memo Salazar. Julia has been organizing for decades to fight displacement and gentrification in Brooklyn with a group called Movement to Protect the People, or MTOP. And Jenny Dubnow and Memo Salazar organized together with the Western Queens Community Land Trust, but they all wear many hats and do many different things. So let's see. Before we hand it off to our speakers and ask them a few questions, we're going to give a brief background on the book project and the oral history project.
Yes. So Disruptive Engagement is a handbook by organizers for organizers. And it draws on experiences and knowledge that Vanessa and I documented through a collaborative oral history project with organizers from across New York City. So the book guides readers in how to participate and disrupt New York City's official decision-making process about changes to our city's land and housing, with the goal of building justice. And drawing on the oral history interviews, we provide specific examples, practical advice from efforts to organize in Gowanus, the Lower East Side, Inwood, Sunset Park, Ridgewood, Flushing, Long Island City, and more. And we want to explain a little bit about how this project came about, what we were kind of experiencing as community organizers as we tried to fight the city's plans to impose big changes on our neighborhoods, many of which we knew would lead to gentrification and displacement, mostly of Black and Brown working class communities. So we'll quickly introduce you to some of the procedures today, just quickly, that activists have to navigate when we want to try to have input in the city's land use decision-making.
Great. Do you want to do the slideshow now or not yet?
Sure, yes.
Cool. Great. So just a little background. Zoning is basically the rules about what can be built where, according to the local city government, how big buildings can be, what kinds of activities, residential, commercial, manufacturing, are permitted in which areas. And in our current system, we've been witnessing over the last couple of decades, and probably even longer, but that's what we'll focus on, that changes to zoning are pretty much being used in service of expanding profits for landlords and developers who are seeking to speculate on the value of the land. So there's been a lot of research done on this, and I'm sure if those of you who are, born and raised New Yorkers have witnessed this over your lifetimes, that a lot of times the promise of affordable housing does lead to displacement. Big towers coming in certain areas. There's a report that that showed the Williamsburg 2005 rezoning caused a huge demographic shift where a lot of the Latinx and Black population left the neighborhood while the white population grew dramatically. And what that maybe doesn't spell out is the kind of class differences or the wealth differences between those residents. But you can feel it in certain neighborhoods. So let's see. So yeah, it's become very clear to us that people who are kind of fighting these specific plans in different neighborhoods really needed to link up a little bit more to kind of get together on how to fight back.
Mm-hmm.
Should I say
Absolutely.
more? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, we were all in our separate neighborhoods, kind of siloed and fighting these fights around rezonings, but we weren't connected to each other or to our broader movement of people fighting for housing justice and healthy communities. So that was sort of the impetus, I think, that Vanessa and I felt like there was this need to connect and document all the knowledge that people had, the incredible experiences that they had gained fighting these fights. And I think, we wanted to learn from organizers how they engaged and disrupted official processes, right? And I think we were wrestling with the idea of non-reformist reform. So we were influenced by the work that comes from Ruth Wilson Gilmore has really worked on this idea. And basically the idea of non-reformist reform are those kinds of reforms that can be undertaken within the conditions that we're living, so within the conditions of capitalism, but a non-reformist reform in the logic and in the practice push so far against the dynamics of capitalism that they end up kind of opening up some cracks, which make it more likely that more radical demands, more movements of change can emerge, right? So we're talking about how to organize for change to push within this capitalist market-driven housing system and within this really unaccountable local democratic decision-making system in ways that could weaken the system and allow more radical demands for housing, for land use to come through. There's a lot to say about that. I mean, of course, the problem sometimes reforms just become reforms and their acceptance, accommodation, their compromise, or we can disagree about what's a reformist reform that opens up those cracks and what's just a plain old reform, right? So there's a lot of complexity there, but on the ground, I think we're dealing with, the nitty gritty, tedious organizing in these government processes, right? And so just a bit of background really quickly about what we were facing. New York City has all these official processes that include the public in decision-making about changes to neighborhoods, including changes to zoning that Vanessa described. And it was really starting in the 1970s that New York City began to include more community participation in decision-making about planning our neighborhoods, about planning housing. But over time, city leadership has constrained, more and more controlled that participation.
Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yes. So one of the major processes that in New York City that addresses changes to zoning is called ULURP, this bizarre word ULURP. And it stands for the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. It's the standard procedures to change zoning are publicly reviewed. And it has become this sort of rubber stamp, right? And so there was this existing handbook put out by a great organization called the Center for Urban Pedagogy that many activists were looking at to try to figure it out. It comes with this very helpful map And so in the ULURP process, when a big zoning change the city wants to push through is introduced, there's all these steps. It takes 217 days or something like that, more than 200 days. And it has all these stops on the road. And you can see there are several stops that include public hearings. There are several stops that include public engagement and ask people to testify, right? So activists were sort of organizers running into each other at these various things, trying to figure out and how to maneuver through this complicated process. And we were all sort of experiencing how the city uses these public hearings to deflect conflict, to try to just maintain the status quo, to generate legitimacy for their preferred development plans, often in the face of huge pushback from community members. But they were using our participation in the process to make it seem more legitimate and democratic, while actually often just completely ignoring community input, right? So we were asking sometimes we should, and so Vanessa and I started seeing, right, like people actually at protesting this arcane, little known process called ULURP, right? Like people showing up with signs about ULURP, right? So it was out there, it's in the air, people are trying to figure it out. So we sort of saw also that there were victories, right? So you might have heard about the Industry City rezoning at Sunset Park, where the community fiercely organized, and we had members of our project who were big participants in that, and pushed back that proposal, which really would have been hugely detrimental to working class communities of color. So we began to ask ourselves, how can we engage this process in these decision makings that seemed rigged? What do we do? How can we build on this knowledge? Vanessa?
Yeah, and we decided to pair organizers across the city to interview one another, partly with the goal of just building relationships, through conversations about, we developed what questions do we want to actually ask each other about tactics and strategies that we've used in navigating some of these situations. And for me, one of the biggest, so these are the participants and kind of generally where they are located or organized. One of the really major things for me was, how do we actually kind of endow each other with legitimacy in our understandings of these power dynamics? Because that's really one major way that we're being kind of like robbed of our agency, is we don't think of ourselves as experts in this or people with opinions that should be taken seriously. So we talked to one another. This archive is available online with the full recordings as well as transcripts. So feel free to browse that. They're some of them are very entertaining, including ones with our guests tonight. Oh wait, will you go back one?
Sure.
And then we did meet in person a couple of times. This was at 6th Street Community Center to kind of review some of the transcripts and go over some ideas. Okay.
And I think just a bit about methodology for people interested in methodology in the room. We drew on this long, rich history of activist oral history and collaborative research, which identifies the importance of listening and learning from each other as a way to build movements for change. And amazing CUNY students helped us produce the transcripts. As Vanessa said, we convened, we discussed the transcripts, and I need to definitely shout out our funders. So the project was funded by the Seminar on Public Engagement and Collaborative Research from the Center for the Humanities at the CUNY Graduate Center, which is funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation. And we also drew on support from a Tau Research grant from Brooklyn College and a social practice grant at CUNY. So this gives you a little bit of a sense of what's in the book. We talk about base building through petitions and other kinds of organizing tactics. We talk about deep roots of injustice, how to craft a positive vision, right? The developers come with their fancy plans. How can communities develop their own vision of what they want? Then we do a whole thing demystifying the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, or ULURP. So I showed you that slide of there was already a handbook, but that handbook that exists did sort of pretended in some ways that there were no class and race injustices or inequalities, right? It was sort of presented as a class and race neutral process, which of course it is not. We talk about how to disrupt inside. So how do you craft an organized presence and testimony for public hearings? We talk about how to disrupt outside. So taking more direct action and creative protests. We build on knowledge. Many groups have gone through legal and used legislative tactics, especially once if ULURP is pushed through, what do community groups do next? And then how do we assess victory and failure in this very long-term struggle? Yeah.
Great. Yes. All very important
Oh,
stuff.
sorry. No, sorry. One more thing. This was just to give you a sense of what's in the handbook. We actually went back and annotated the explanation that was already out there, but we added sort of a lot more knowledge from an activist organizer perspective on what was missing from how to understand this process.
Great. So yeah, we want to get a little more anecdotal now. So our first speaker is going to be Julia Bryant. This is her fabulous quote. And we'd like to start out with just, Julia, how you got involved in organizing and kind of what drew you in the first place in your neighborhood.
What drew me in? I think that phrase, what is not a policy and what then becomes a policy. Your first battle of activism is the battle of inertia. It is the fight between going to that meeting and having dinner. And people were on their way to the meeting, but they had dinner, and then they didn't just say, F gentrification, they said F that meeting, and they'll go to the next one. And I saw that, and I said I didn't want that to be me. I started with my land use activation when, okay, wait a minute, let me go to the way back. The original reason why I stand up is my building was bought from the city for $1. 1980. The city can do these things. When they tell you they can't do it, I live in this house. It was bought for $1. We had to fix it up. They gave us all sorts of tax discounts to, I think they were called rebates or abatements or something, if we put windows in. And everything we did, the city was helpful. Con Edison gave me $100 to put a stove in because they wanted to make sure that I had a gas stove and not an electric stove. So that's how it starts.
So you were first involved with the Atlantic Yards, what's now known as the Barclays Center project,
yes.
right?
Yes. So then the next thing, so we're living our best life and dealing with, drugs in our neighborhood, and my neighborhood is coalescing a little bit together, and we're trying not to be rude to each other. And the Atlantic Yards, there are these notices that they're going to put up this stadium, and no one's clear on what to look at. I think that's the thing that I want to say to anyone who's looking at a plan that comes in. You can't tell where to look because everyone will tell you something different. And even if you go to your land use committee for your community board, even they don't get the primary information.
So yeah, and we talk more about this in the book, which has some interesting illustrations of the original designs for Atlantic Yards too, that were much, much bigger. So that's also an interesting thing to consider, that sometimes victory and failure aren't always immediately kind of obvious. But I guess maybe we should move a little bit into talking about what campaigns you've worked on with, what other campaigns you worked on with MTOP before we talk about Mayor Adams' City of Yes.
Okay, so in 2014, there was, I guess there was a proposal for, no, yeah, 2014, there was a proposal about an armory in Crown Heights. And people started to coalesce together about that. And then at around 2014, MTOP was created by some women who wanted to know what was going on. They were in the community, and some of them were block associations, and yes, there you go. Block associations, and some of them were tenants and some of them were homeowners. And I guess cut to the chase, a developer wanted to put up some towers in along the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And we fought back and we won. I think that's the best sentence to say. We fought back and we won. And we used every trick in the book. My favorite thing is, and I think that hat, the flower in my hat sort of speaks to it. We brought flowers to the courthouse every time we came. And so that the court, people in the court knew who we were because we literally left a trail of flowers. And we won. And, you know, people got arrested. So to say it in quickly is, I guess those are the highlights. People got arrested. We had a judge who told the developer, bring back the soil. 74 tons of soil, he told them to bring back because they took soil away. And I want to say about that, we had legal fights and we won. But this is what I want to impart on anybody who's looking at this as a battle that they're like, well, you could do it, but I can't do it. There is an office in Brooklyn, in the Brooklyn courthouse, that's for Article 78s. There are 4 people in there. And if you go in there and you tell them, I want to sue the city, they will kind of jump over themselves to help you because nobody ever comes in there to ask them. And
Can
they
you
will be very,
tell what Article 78 is, just if they aren't
oh,
familiar?
I'm sorry. Article 78 is how you sue the city. So you don't sue the city by just saying you want to sue the city. It's in New York City, that process is called the Article 78. I didn't know what it was either, and I was a paralegal, and I spent days going, what the hell is that? And nobody, unless you're suing the city, will be able to tell you that. But when you are ready to sue the city about whatever nonsense or shenanigans they're pulling, you can go down to that Brooklyn office, and they are like, nobody asked them anything. And they're like, what do you want? How do you want it? I got more copies. And then they will say to you, even more remarkable, do you want to pay? Because we could probably tell you how to not pay, because we could tell you what box to check off, and you don't even have to pay. You can sue the city and not have to pay. So don't think of what you can't do. Think of, and I say that all the time about everything. Think about what you can do. There are all sorts of things. And then the other thing I want to say is this is very hard work, and you can do it with very few people. I think people get discouraged when they say, you know, I went to a meeting, there were only like 76 people. Really? 76? That's major. And also, they're not coming back. So they're not coming back. They came the one time, and they'll keep telling people how they worked on a project and they came the one time. They maybe came the 2 times. But you know what? They are your supporters, and they're holding all the good thoughts in their heart for you. And all that work can be done with 6 or 7 people. Atlantic Yards, the core group, 8 people.
Wow.
And
Amazing.
4 of them didn't work hard, okay? So
Real talk over here.
no names will be called. No names will be called, but many of them.
Thank you so much, Julie. I think we're going to bring in Jenny and Memo to the conversation to add and layer in sort of more information and ideas. Thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear from you, Julia. So welcoming Jenny Duvnall and Memo Salazar. They both co-chair the Western Queens Community Land Trust, and they also wear many, many hats and do incredible organizing in many, many fights. So I'm going to pass it along to them.
Did you want us to? Okay, great.
Sorry. Yes, sorry. I forgot about the incredible quote we also have from Jenny, which also includes expletives. Our favorite quotes just happen to have some expletives. But really, Jenny just going for it about what planning should be. It should be about what the community needs, right? So one of my favorite quotes from our handbook. Jenny.
And we can talk about it a little more later. I'm going to let Memo take, when we're ready, take the next slide. But we in Long Island City, we're undergoing yet another series of rezonings, and it's like, here we go again. And that's why the expletives come in a lot of times from the community organizers, because it is exhausting. And it's really like David and Goliath, where these corporate landowners and landlords and developers are hand in glove with, unfortunately, with city agencies, with elected officials, and community working folk who live in the community. It's on us to try to battle them. And so we do our best to engage with ULURP in a way that is not disempowering. And it's very exhausting. Like what Julia said, you're choosing a community meeting over going to dinner that night. And it's just endless. So that's why I think we turn to cuss words sometimes, because the frustration can build. But I'll turn it over to Memo to start us off. We just have 2 quick slides. We'll try to be real brief about this.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, for those of you who don't know what CLTs are, community land trusts, the basic idea, and it goes back to something, I like how you phrased it, Naomi, of like, you're trying to work within this capitalist system to do things that are anti the capitalist system. And so that's basically what a CLT is, what attracted it to me, because you do get burned out just going to like a protest and then getting nowhere, and it's draining. It also isn't very constructive, right? It's always you on the defensive saying no, and that's frustrating. Like that's not something any person I think wants to be. People want to be creating things and doing things, and CLTs were like the first glimmer of hope in the housing world that I saw, at least in my generation. There's been great programs previously, but by the time I came along, they were all like dying or dead. So CLTs are amazing in that sense. The biggest problem is that there's no money and land is really expensive, and there's no political will. There is money. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. There's tons of money. There's no political will to bring that money towards what we needed to. And that's the real challenge. But the way a community land trust works is that it takes the land and it splits the land and the building that's on top of it into 2 separate entities. So the whole point of us in Queens, the Western Queens Community Land Trust, is like, let's say there's a group of people, a community of folks who, let's say, is senior housing is a problem, and there's a lot of folks who are senior citizens. They can't afford apartments anymore. They really want to get this building that they see that is for sale, or maybe it's been closed and the city has it, or who knows, whatever the situation is. But there's this building, there's a need, and they just don't know how to get the building. And so in theory, right, where they would come to us and we would partner with them. And they're the motivating factor. That's the thing I want to point out about CLTs. Like, we're just here to support the community. The CLT isn't like a company that's trying to buy buildings and create like their monopoly portfolio. Like, we're here to always just serve as like the tools for the community. So in this case, this group who is looking for senior housing comes with us, and we buy the building, through whatever number of funding streams that we're able to put together, and money from elected officials and grants and so on. And now we have the building, and they own that building. So the folks that are the seniors are either renting it from a group, or they themselves are co-op owners, or however that building is turned out. It's just the same as any apartment building in terms of your ownership. Like, it's yours. You can give it to your kids. If it's a single family home and you're on CLT property, you can give it to your kids. They can give it to their kids. So it's yours in every step of the way. What isn't yours is the land underneath it. And that's a huge difference. It's sort of going back to the philosophy that we can't own land. Land is not a commodity. It is something that we just come through and then leave, and someone else is here. And while we're on it, we're the stewards of that land. And so the CLT acts sort of as like the legal version, because we live in this capitalist system with rules and laws and so on. The CLT sort of is that placeholder for stewardship through like a legal capitalist system. And we're here to hold the deed, and the deed will say, if you do want to sell your house at some point, you can't sell it for more than X. And there's probably other stipulations as well that basically are meant to benefit the community. And so you're now looking at a house or a building not as a valuable property for investment that builds equity that you can make money off of in the future. You're looking at it as purely as a home. And the next person that buys it from you has to follow that same stipulation, because they don't own the land underneath the building. They only own the building or the house. That's basically how CLTs work. Could go on further, but that's like your basic quick little tour.
Yep.
So I guess our CLT, and it doesn't have to be housing. It can be commercial property. It can be a garden, right? A community garden. It can be anything.
Yeah, and it could be rental, a small building with apartments. Like, someone put a link in the chat about another CLT, the East New York CLT, which bought a small apartment building, a little rent stabilized building, and the tenants now, the CLT owns this building, or the land under the building, and the tenants now have control over that building, and they're renters. So that no one's making a profit off that building anymore. So the rents that need to be charged can obviously be a lot less, because you're not padding it with landlord profit. So it's both keeping land and apartments and buildings permanently affordable, hopefully as deeply affordable as is possible. And also, the other part of it, as Memo was saying, is it's controlled by community members and local actors.
Sorry to cut in. Can you talk a little bit about how you both came to this organizing around community land trust, and how the Western Queens Community Land Trust formed, and also love to hear about like how you think about navigating the city's processes around this issue specifically, and pushing back and trying to open up the cracks.
Do you want to go to the next slide? Because that's a perfect segue. Because I have a feeling both Memo and I came to CLTs from the same place, which was, you can see the kind of bottom middle slide of the guy in front of the banner. Amazon HQ was going to come to Queens, and that is exactly where our first CLT project was sitting on that land. So you see images of this big manufacturing building. You see that on the top right, and it's a city-owned building that's owned by the Department of Education. That means it's publicly owned, and the city, as you all know, and the state was going to turn a whole bunch of land on this one waterfront spot in Western Queens, right near the bridge. You can see it in the map on the bottom. Do you see the white building that's kind of in the middle? That's the DOE building. That's exactly where the Amazon headquarters was going to go. And as you all know, we kind of said no to the Amazon headquarters, bye-bye. And then a couple of us who were very engaged with that fight, there was a big community pushback in Western Queens against that, which was lots and lots of groups, mostly immigrant-led groups, I'm going to say, including Queens Neighborhoods United. Lots of groups came together, and a couple of us started to think, this is city-owned land. We're glad Amazon is gone, but developers keep wanting to develop this land along the water, a lot of which is owned by the city. So why should we get any luxury housing or any kind of luxury development on it? And we start to think, why couldn't it be a community land trust? And we learned that indeed you can have a community land trust that's not residential, as Memo was saying, and this building is zoned, as we were talking about zoning before, for manufacturing use. It's a big old building that's used to make things and handle food and has office space and workspace. So we thought the community desperately needs that. We're losing our manufacturing zones. There's good jobs in the manufacturing zones. The rents are less in the manufacturing zones. When they change manufacturing zones to residential use, the developers make a lot more money. The rents start to soar. That's where you start to, that's one way that you start to see gentrification. So we had an alternative vision for that building. And through that, we learned that yes, you can make a community land trust. So that's what got the Western Queens Community Land Trust started. And this was our first project. We call it, it's owned by the DOE and it's called the DOE building, but we have called it the Queensboro People Space. We have a big study that we got a little grant to work on. We had an architect work on it, and we'll be happy to share that with you if you want to look at it. It's actually really interesting to look at. I see in the chat, someone is asking, how do we get the city to sell it? We do not have this building yet. So we are involved in a big fight. We want the city to give us the building or possibly lease us the land under the building for 99 years, which is not to get into the weeds, but that's kind of based, it might as well be the same thing as giving you the land. That's considered a forever lease in real estate terms. So we're actively involved with organizing the community to fight for this space. We want to, I mean, right now, the truth of the matter is there's a big rezoning that we're fighting right now called 1LIC, which is coming from the Department of City Planning, and some local city officials are supporting it, seem to be supporting it so far, sadly. And we are working hard, like with Disruptive Engagement, the book that we're talking about today, to work within and outside the system to fight back against the rezoning that's going to affect the entire neighborhood. We know for a fact that they want to upzone. They want to put even more luxury towers. LIC is chock full of luxury towers. There are big NYCHA developments there. The folks who live in NYCHA are always ignored. The rezonings never give anything to them. And this building is kind of the jewel in the crown of our fight back in a certain way, because we want this building to be a bulwark against the gentrification that has really attacked Long Island City, displaced many, many Black and brown and low-income folks from the neighborhood in favor of wealthier, whiter folks who are populating those unaffordable towers. And we've lost a lot of good jobs and working artist space. And that's what LIC always historically was. So this building, we wanted to serve the folks who live in NYCHA, which is like a 10-block walk away, Queensbridge and Ravenswood, very close by. We want it, and you can see some of the uses we have there for it in terms of our vision. We want deeply affordable manufacturing space, a food co-op, art and music studios for kids who live in Queensbridge who are talented and don't have any place they can afford to work. Job training, real job training, not the fake job training that the city always says is coming with these developments, like with Amazon. When you really looked into it, it was just, it will help you with your resume. It was BS. So we want a building that genuinely serves the community. And then the other thing I'll say about us is that we have CLTs usually have a geographic area apart, like, and ours is kind of part of basically a big swath of Western Queens. So we're also looking to we can have multiple projects. So this is our first big project, but we're also looking into creating some deeply affordable housing. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to shut up, is that with this 1LIC rezoning that's coming, we want to weave in the CLT, but we also are working with a coalition of local groups to have a big town hall. And I see there's a lot of Queens people here, so I want to put the flyer in the chat, actually. That's going to happen next Saturday, this coming Saturday in Long Island City. And we really are trying to get a lot of folks who live in Ravenswood and Queensbridge to come out to that town hall, because so far, the city-led process, the U part, which is like pre-ULURP, I would say, to try to engage the community, has been really a dog and pony show, as it always is. They are ignoring what people are saying. It's a waste of people's time. They're not listening to people. So we want to have a town hall where people can learn about the history of rezonings and LIC and really speak up. And we're going to attempt to gather what people really say and do our best to present that to the city and to the public. So we can't be ignored. And that's a dilemma with ULURP. We need it, and that maybe is a segue to City of Yes, because the City of Yes is going to get rid of the ULURP process for certain areas so that they can just be upzoned as of right, which means you don't have to go through the whole process. We hate ULURP. It's a love-hate thing. We hate it because it's rigged. On the other hand, at least it's a chance for the community to weigh in. So if the city of Yes gets rid of ULURP for certain zoned areas or certain types of areas, that means the developers can just swoop in and do whatever they want. And we won't even have the ULURP time
To clarify, this is Mayor Adams' term, not ours.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe we can just briefly segue to a couple minutes before we open to question and answer from our lovely audience about the city of Yes. So if people want to jump in on that, I mean, my understanding is somewhat limited, but I know that Adams got together with banks and real estate moguls largely and developed plans to figure out how to deregulate much of our regulation about zoning. And oh, great, Alicia Boyd, please. Alicia, will you please introduce yourself, and we'd love to hear from you on this.
Hi, my name is Alicia Boyd, and I represent MTOP, the Movement to Protect the People. Can you hear me, guys? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yes.
loud and clear, Alicia.
My community is the Flatbush, Crown Heights community. We are what we call the Black side of Prospect Park. And we got involved in rezonings and applications since 2014 when a massive rezoning proposal was being done to our community underneath Eric Adams. We've done a lot of different types of actions. We've done lawsuits, we've done protests, we've done disruption. What we found in the ULURP process is you can't let it begin, because by the time it begins, it's almost a done deal. And we've learned that even though you might win in the courts, the higher courts tend to always back the real estate industry. And so we did a fantastic job, and Julia was definitely a part of that process. But what we found is that, the legal avenue it will not necessarily stop a rezoning. However, there are some positives to doing legal actions, because then it stops other potential developers from coming into that community, because they understand that they will face some legal actions and that's going to cost them money. And of course, that's what they don't want. The best way, if you're going to deal with a ULURP process and you know that it's about to happen, is to try to stop it before it gets to the ULURP process. So that pre-certification is really important. Staying involved in your community board so you know when those pre-certification actions are happening, and then organizing around that. That we find is probably the best solution to stopping a massive rezoning. Because once the Department of City Planning certifies an application and the ULURP process begins, it's basically a done deal. You might get a few minor changes, but it's just all rubber stamp. The Department of City Planning has a 99% chance of passing what they have certified. So you tell me, you got a 1% chance. As far as, and I definitely agree with the presenters that the City of Yes by the mayor is something that every community in New York City should be involved in, because this is going to change the dynamics of how development happens and basically give developers a carte blanche into almost every community to do exactly what they want without even the ULURP process, without even that community engagement that can be effective if you use it before the certified application. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for jumping in. Really appreciate your presence here. So yeah, I mean, we would love to, we have some time for question and answer. And so maybe we can just get into that now. That's the end of the slides. So I will stop sharing the slideshow. Thank you. And we'd love to hear from people about, your experiences, your questions about community engagement, how to disrupt, how to both engage, but disrupt, right? So many of us, we're not walking away and throwing our hands up, but we're trying to figure out how to upend the status quo here. So, and that requires deep organizing. So,
can I say something about City of Yes? Just to sort of add something to what Alicia was saying, which is that I was on a panel with DCP a few weeks ago, and they had a whole City of Yes presentation. And so there's a very strong narrative right now that you will see everywhere, including the New York Times, city officials, like everyone is that we're behind on housing. We need to build more housing. I mean, we just have to. We have to build more housing, taller, denser. It's just there's like almost no public debate, sadly, about this just basic idea. And it's true, we do need housing, right? I'm not. That's technically not incorrect that we need housing. And then where it gets the debate always happens is that the whole like if you build enough then the demand will go down because the supply will go up and things will get cheaper, and none of the data backs that up. And sort of connected to, so the city of yes thing is a lot of like she was saying, a lot of deregulation, right? We're going to change the zoning laws, make it simpler, make it easier to build. And when you read the, I mean, it's a huge thing. There's a million things in there, and some of it makes sense, some of it isn't so terrible. It's woven and there's some things that are like, okay, like basement apartments make it easier to turn that into that technically, I mean, maybe there's issues, but on the surface it doesn't seem so bad. The problem is that there's no that if you're going to make it easier to build and so on, but you're not going to fund affordable housing, if you're not going to put any serious money towards affordable housing, then they're just going to build market rate, and which is pretty obvious probably to most of us, but like that's the problem. The city, every time we'd be on that panel and I would bring that part up, like there was no answer. They couldn't give an answer. All they have is the AMI, MIH standard, which gives you a tiny sliver of affordable housing. They all admit that it's not enough. Everyone says, the city will say, yeah, it's not great, but it's all we have. And they leave it at that. And so like, until there's like a political pressure to get major funding from the federal government, the state government, and the city, that like you can't have one without the other. It's like I would be much more open to something City of Yes like if it was like hand in hand with a ginormous philosophical and economic shift in how we do things to build truly affordable housing, but it's not. So you just get the zoning changes without any of the commitment to build affordable housing, and that's the problem. But it's never framed that way, right? It's always like, no, these regulations are going to be good if we remove them. It makes it easier to build, so we don't have to wait 20 years for a building to happen. And if you're not totally aware of that, it kind of sounds good. It's like you're like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. And that's what happens to a lot of people in the cities. Like they're not seeing all the facts, and so it's easy to sort of like play that little piper music, and like everyone just kind of follows along. So anyway, I just wanted to add that to Alicia because she's totally right, and the argument keeps happening where you get stuck in these arguments with people that are really pro this, and they need all those facts. So.
Great. Should we go to questions from the audience? Thank you for definitely adding that memo. Let's go to Audrey first. Can you unmute?
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much. This was really great. I'm looking forward to, a friend gave me the book actually, and I'm looking forward to reading it. I am curious. I'm a doctoral student. I'm looking at the PEGs that Mayor Adams has been putting forward. Those are the cuts, the budget cuts that came through last November. And so I actually have two questions. One is about coalition with folks who are facing those kind of cuts. I'm just curious if there's been any like crossover. I know that the workers also live in buildings, so I'm sure there is crossover, but I'm just curious how that's been playing out. And then secondly, someone mentioned like how Adams has been meeting with developers. I'm sure that was around City of Yes to some degree, but I would be curious to learn more about that relationship he has with developers and what that's looked like. Thank you so much.
Well, I can start by just saying, one of the things that I learned organizing with the Coalition to Protect Chinatown and Lower East Side is we were really welcomed into that group as a group of artists who were interested in organizing against gentrification. And so they really kind of pulled out, okay, what does it mean to be part of a neighborhood? And that does include people who frequent the neighborhood for all number of different reasons. So I think that's a really important point around, workers live in housing too. So these issues are definitely interrelated. Does anyone else have thoughts they want to jump in with around the budget cuts or?
Well, I mean, this is a whole other rabbit hole to go down, but obviously the priorities, budgets are moral documents, as people say. And the priority is we're cutting daycare, we're cutting libraries, and we're funding the police. We're adding National Guards people to the subways when actually the crime is really not that high historically. And what we're not doing is we're not funding human needs. We're not funding, there's a big article in the Times the other day about Paris and how there's a huge amount of public housing in Paris. Why aren't we doing that? We're behind. We're stupid. It's the political will is not there to take large amounts, not a little couple thousand here or there, billions. That's what our tax money should go for. What's more important to stabilize a city and to create equity, an equitable city, than to make sure no one's living on the streets? No one should be living on the streets. We're the richest country in the world. And yet we're painted as crazy and unrealistic for saying tax the billionaires and build deeply affordable housing. Buy land, like Vienna, that has a lot of social housing, which is affordable, and that's all good. The city owns a huge proportion of the land. And, we used to do that kind of thing during the New Deal in this country, and we don't anymore because of austerity. So the budgets reflect the political priorities, and unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. And the biggest donors to these political elected officials' campaigns is the real estate lobby. Don't get it twisted. Kathy Hochul, Eric Adams, Bill de Blasio, too. So this is what we're faced with. So.
And around coalition building, I know that many of my CUNY comrades who are involved with the PSC, our union, and with students who are fighting for a New Deal for CUNY, for free tuition, have been joining in coalition with people across the city fighting Adams cuts because they affect community colleges. So there's a deep connections there that we're joining together. Maybe we can, unless anybody wants to jump in, we could maybe turn to Roger.
I'll just say,
Sorry,
somebody had, the original question was what's the connection between the Adams and the real estate people? And I'm trying to find the link, but Alicia, who just spoke, and Movement to Protect the People have a very detailed, if you go to their website, a very, very detailed breakdown where it explains exactly who the people were and the names it's all there. I learned all of it through them. So I appreciate it, Alicia, for putting that out there. So you should go to their website. I believe there's videos, there's all sorts of information, but that breaks it down better than I think anyone else could hear on the call right now. So.
Excellent, thank you. Roger, do you have a question?
Yeah, this is great. Hi, I'm Roger Manning, co-founder of Magic, and I recognize so many faces here. The Metro Area Governors Island Coalition. Memo, hi. Thanks to your organization for supporting our lawsuit. And of course, Alicia Boyd was one of our early mentors in figuring out how to pro se start an Article 78 because we couldn't get a lawyer in time. In any case, an update is that we lost in the appellate recently, and we're going to go to the New York State, Court of Appeals if we can pull together some funding, and that's where that's at. A thought I have, it's more kind of just thoughts that I wanted to express from what I was hearing. And that is, ULERP is a dog and pony show. And well, Magic is kind of a new group. We started, just a couple of years ago when the ULERP process for the Governor's Island awful rezoning was, taking place. And so we've learned kind of the hard way a lot of what y'all are explaining. But I guess a thought I'm having is the lawsuit, yeah, the odds are way against us, but it's served us in other ways. It's kind of got us a seat at the table here and there. It helps us get the issues out there where they wouldn't get out otherwise. Developers, all these universities that want to build a climate center in Governor's Island, they're just hearing from the city and the trust, all this, sunshiny, hey, here's his blank slate, yada, yada, yada. But then, then there's a lawsuit and then there was Magic talking. We met with Stony Brook a couple of times before they got selected to build a climate center. And their plans are actually infinitely less terrifying than they were. Still not good enough, but the lawsuit has helped serve indirectly in those ways. So I think that's good. Problem is, of course, trying to get money together for that. And the thing is with which is I think Western Queensland Land Trust and other folks that joined Christopher Marte in an amicus brief supporting our lawsuit recognize that it's not just Governor's Island. It's applies to the wider city and state rezoning efforts and preserving green space and stopping land grabs and accountability. And actually, I guess the key thing I want to bring up here, which maybe some of you might have thoughts on, a big issue in the lawsuit is standing. And what's particularly unique about this lawsuit, this Article 78 against rezoning, is that there's a deed involved. Governor's Island actually has a deed. And we're saying that the city was arbitrary and capricious in approving a rezoning that would violate the deed, which it does essentially. And but because nobody has standing to enforce the deed except the Trust for Governor's Island, who's essentially planning to violate it, and the National Park Service, who isn't going to get involved. And so we're trying, it's very slippery to try to get some traction and with regard to standing for the public, for the general public. Yeah. And we're hoping that maybe that'll be one of the unique things that this the Court of Appeals will kind of recognize, and maybe we can get some precedent. But also, it's just the city violating its own contract is another thing.
Yeah,
I know I'm going on and on here. I'll pause here for thought.
Thank you. Yeah, in the handbook, there's a section on trying to deal with lawsuits and how community organizers can keep the momentum and communities engaged. Sometimes when it goes to the courts, all the organizing that's been happening on the ground, it's hard to keep people informed. And so we talk about all the effort that goes into making sure that there's this connection between what's happening in the courts and what's happening on the streets, I guess. But I was going to ask if there are other questions. Oh yeah, Julia, please. I have a question.
Roger, I applaud you on the concept of lawsuits giving you there's a level of standing that you have by starting a lawsuit. You then have an ability to talk to other people about, you keep your issue alive. The secondary thing I want to say about lawsuits, and it is one of the ultimates of disruption. And what we found in Atlantic Yards, in the fight of Atlantic Yards, is because the fight went on so long, we were able to basically bankrupt the original developer. And I always say you slow their roll, you make them unpopular with the banks. The similar thing happened with us when MTOP was suing developers and the city, that we went through, somebody help me out, it seemed like 16 or 17 different law law firms. Every time we came to court, there was a new lawyer. That developer had to pay for lawyers. We had a lawyer, one of our favorite lines is, we had a lawyer who looked at Alicia and said, oh, this is going to be fun. You know what? We chased him down the street the other day because he did not win. We won. And what I'm trying to say is lawsuits slow their roll. And when you think that you can't win or you're not winning, there's a level of the universe kicking back. And the universe, when the universe kicks back, it kicks their ass. Okay? It kicks their ass because their banks, this is what happens. Their banks stop talking to them. The banks are not interested. And next thing you know, they're selling and they're moving. And, they don't say, oh, I got my ass beat by a bunch of women. They don't say that, but that's what happens. So
I agree with that. And I think, I know that a lot of folks myself included, can feel very demoralized and really just burned out and exhausted, continuing to fight because we're really just people and we're fighting global capital. That's what we're fighting. So we have to take it's real. The burnout is real, the exhaustion is real, and the sense of being demoralized and frustrated is real. On the other hand, what amazes me always is how much more power we have than we think we have. Like some people earlier were saying, I think it was Julia who was saying that one of the core groups was 8 people. It's like if you bring 30 people to a hearing and every single person gets up and yells and screams about gentrification and displacement, that creates a tremendous amount of political pressure. For every email that you send, they read their emails. If you call their office, they tally it up because they're thinking about votes and getting reelected. You disrupt a hearing, the media is going to cover it. Like we shut down a Sunnyside Yards hearing. We've shut down BQX hearings. Alicia has shut down many a hearing. Sometimes it just takes a few people. And, if you're voicing what many people agree with, the power that you're going to wield is more than you think. Now, it doesn't mean we're always going to win. Like in Washington, in Inwood, that community fought its heart out against their upzoning. They blocked traffic, they occupied the local city council member's office, and they still lost. And that community, boy, did they fight their hearts out. And that was really hard. On the other hand, you don't always lose. Sometimes you win. And I think the more we fight back and the more connections we make with each other across different communities, the better position we'll be in. And I think with the City of Yes, what we're seeing, thinking about the whole thing as an ecosystem, what's happening now, we're going to see it with the City of Yes. We see it with local upzonings that are already happening. We see it in LIC. They're giving away public land to developers still. We see the HPD, the Housing and Preservation Department, the housing department of the city, is essentially, there's a publicly owned piece of land on Hunters Point South in southern LIC, Long Island City, right on the water, tons of luxury housing all over. This is city-owned land. They're putting out a request for proposals. Is it to nonprofits or CLTs? No, it's to anyone. 800 to 900 units of housing, 60% affordability is all they're asking on public land. So who's going to answer this? For TF Cornerstone or some other for-profit, Blackstone, BlackRock, whoever they are. They're going to answer. They're
involved on Governor's Island. Everything you just described, Governor's Island, and the thing we found recently, digging down into the zoning and the lawsuit, and it wasn't so clear before, but actually the zoning would allow, this is prohibited by the deed, permanent private residential development on Governor's Island, which is something people didn't realize. So it's public land, and yes.
Thank you so much, Roger. I think Alicia had her hand up. Please, Alicia.
I think people need to understand that for the last 2 decades, we've been engaged in what we call private-public partnerships. And this has been the model of development of the real estate industry when it comes to housing average New Yorkers, in which the city gives them the land, gives them all the money, and then in return, they promise to provide housing for the average New Yorker. That has not worked. We've seen it. They've been doing it. That's why we have the numbers that we have. That's why we have below 3.9% of the community, of people who make under $25,000 cannot find housing. They have a 6% chance. If you make $25,000 or less, you have a 6% chance of finding an apartment in New York City. The City of Yes their target population is for people who make $100,000 or more. That's their minimum. So what we see is that the public-private partnerships are not working, and we have to start demanding from our elected officials to stop the public-private partnerships, because we know all the developers want to do is make money. That's their goal. And yet we give them basically everything to create this housing. We give them the land, we give them the money to build the housing, and they don't provide the housing for the average New Yorker, even though they call it affordable. But I just want to go back to that young lady's position about how did Eric Adams get here. Eric Adams was supported by the real estate industry in Borough Hall. He became the Borough Hall president because no other person challenged him in that race, because they went around behind closed doors buying up everyone who would challenge him. So he got to be the borough president with no opposition. So we didn't really vote him in, because if you don't have an opponent, then you automatically win. So, and his relationship with the real estate showed his the first person that he, as his chief of staff, if you understand what a chief of staff is, that's your right-hand man. He was the lawyer that was on our case against Cornell Realty. He was the primary lawyer. Frank Carone is a lawyer for the real estate industry. Eric Adams made the chief of staff for 1 year. And during that 1 year, this is when they created the city of Yes, because he's a lawyer for real estate. So he knew all the laws that prevent his clients from being able to build without having to pay all this money, without to have community engagement. And he used that knowledge to create the city of Yes with all the developers in public, people's names are on the documents. And so his connection to the real estate is so entwined that he doesn't see people, he sees the real estate industry. And so understand that that's the real estate connection. And he still is pro real estate, pro developer, pro public private partnerships. And we should be demanding an end to private public partnerships when it comes to creating housing for the average New Yorker. We need to stop that. We need to say, stop with that. Thank you.
And the argument again is, if we don't go to the private sector to build, we're not going to build anything. They're the only ones that are going to build. And there's a new bill, if you don't know about it, I just put a link in the chat, for a social housing bill that now that 421A expired, the governor has this whole plan, to kind of figure that out. And it's not really funneling money towards a true affordability. There's all these issues with it. But there's a counter proposal, the social housing plan, that would basically truly fund CLTs and other groups. It's an alternative to the sort of mainstream thing. It's not the magic bullet that'll solve everything, but it is a serious step towards starting to change the money to go towards what we need it to go to. Because if we don't do something like that legislatively, our officials are not they're trapped by this sort of neoliberal concept of needing private companies to do everything for us. And that's not going to change until there's some major shifts in the architecture of how our economy works, which is going back to FDR and like the 30s and in the 40s, when we actually as a country decided we cared about funding housing. And so we're so far away from that, but this bill is one step at least. So I would encourage people to read about it, learn about it, and push their elected officials.
Can I jump in real quick? I know we have to end soon, but I kind of just wanted to add a few thoughts on that. One of our goals with this project and really with our organizing more broadly is just for us to understand that we are powerful ourselves, and to reorient away from lawmakers and press toward each other as a kind of fundamental, and that a lot of times the legislation is important, but it comes as the compromise after the more radical demands. And so there's always a kind of push and pull there, but it kind of comes down to how we even understand the situation that we're in and the groundwork that has been laid to get to this moment. And I can't help but think of all of the organizing, for instance, around solidarity with Palestine, that for decades seemed like it was not gaining enough traction, and so we're just, you never know what direction the wind is going to blow. So it's always worth standing up and getting to know the people around you.
Agree. Thank you so much, Vanessa. And thank you again to Gaston for hosting this and the Wolf Institute. Thank you so much to our guests today, Memo, Julia, Jenny, and Alicia. showing up. Really appreciate everyone, and to all the students who are listening from CUNY. I think it can feel very overwhelming. How do you begin? But I think you can begin in your own neighborhood, on your own block, talking to your neighbor. What's going on with you? What are the struggles you're facing? Talking to your fellow students. Don't you think we should have free tuition? Why are our buildings crumbling? What's happening here? So really starting locally about what your needs are, what your demands are, and working with other people. But thank you all so much. This has been a delight. Really appreciate it.
To thank both, the speakers and the collaborators in this fantastic handbook, which I think everyone should get and pass around and learn from, so we can create a more just city. One of the songs that played at the beginning of the event said, "The people have the power to redeem the work of fools upon the meek." And, power needs both knowledge and strategizing. And that's what you have given us. And that's what this book gives us, right? From how to, deal with the battle of inertia, as Julia put it, right? To how to stop rigged processes, right? To how to imagine alternatives and create new things, to how to fight back and to win. And so thank you so much for teaching us. Thank you so much for being in conversation with us. Thank you so much for all those who joined on the call. Let's keep this conversation moving forward. And more importantly, let's keep mobilizing and acting up so that we can create a better world, and starting right here in our city. So thank you so much to everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Keep fighting.
Thank you all.